Well, we're all standing by wanting to know what happened with the Supreme Court this past week, and relative to the Obamacare. We have one of the gentlemen that has argued before the Supreme Court about the Obamacare case, and what a delight to have with us. You perhaps have seen, read him. He's been all over the place. Gary Kreep is with us today, who is one of the attorneys on the case. Hi, Gary. How are you doing today?
Fine. Thank you for having me on your show.
Good. Thank you for being with us. I know you're a busy man and everybody wants you. What happened?
That's a good question. Everyone expected that Chief Justice Roberts would be firmly on the side of the U.S. Constitution in voting to overturn Obamacare. Apparently, what's coming out now is that that was originally what was going to happen, and at the last moment, the majority opinion, which was written by Justice Scalia, became the minority opinion, the dissenting opinion. And Justice Kennedy, who's usually the swing vote, was firmly on the side of overturning Obamacare, basically because he had answered the same question in slightly different wordings on all 3 days of argument and gotten the same bad answer. His question was essentially, if Obamacare is constitutional, are there any limits to the power of the federal government? And the answer was essentially no. And that means that under the limited and enumerated powers of the federal government, if for nothing else, the Obamacare legislation should have been overturned. The Supreme Court did hold that it was unconstitutional under the Interstate Commerce Clause, but then came up with this bizarre argument that it was a tax and therefore constitutional. And that's really thrown a lot of people off, because the Obama administration argued on the trial court level, on the Circuit Court of Appeal level, and at the Supreme Court that it wasn't a tax. And in fact, Mr. Obama, back a couple of years ago, in an aired interview with George Stephanopoulos, berated George Stephanopoulos for even suggesting that it was a tax, and basically belittled him, which I thought was a little over the top. But Mr. Obama's so arrogant, he's likely to do things like that.
All right. Now, a couple things here, because your early predictions, you thought Roberts was a solidly in the camp of Scalia, Thomas, and Alito, and Kennedy was going to be the swing vote. And here it turns out that Roberts said, and apparently now, as we speak, I'm reading articles that it was a last-minute turnaround for Roberts. And this is very, very interesting. So did they change the meaning of the bill with this decision?
Effectively, yes. The Supreme Court has declared it's a tax, which now impacts how it can be dealt with in Congress. And I haven't really gone through all the ramifications of that yet. Forgive me. As we tape this, it's still a pretty new thing that's happened. And it's 193 pages. I haven't read it all. I've read parts of it. And this is a bizarre thing. I mean, this to me is reminiscent of when we had Roe v. Wade. And Judge Blackmun was originally going to vote to uphold restrictions on abortions. And then one of his law clerks, and this has come out in articles, I think even in a book subsequent, that one of his law clerks turned him completely around on the issue and got him to vote in favor of basically determining abortion to be a constitutional right, which I personally disagree with, but that's not my call right now. But now we have a situation where Chief Justice Roberts is being targeted specifically by the Obama administration and their allies in the media. And this has been public knowledge for some point in time. And most people said, well, it won't work on Justice Roberts. He's steadfast in his belief in the Constitution. He's not going to turn. Well, obviously something happened. And at the last moment, he turned. This is seen by the several references in Justice Scalia's dissenting opinion, in which he references the dissent of Justice Ginsburg, and also in Justice Thomas's concurring dissenting opinion, in which he titles it a joint opinion, i.e. the majority opinion, instead of a joint dissenting opinion. So there's a lot of things going on here that we don't know. But in reality, it's a dark day for the Constitution. Basically, Justice Roberts has declared an end to the limited and enumerated powers by this action.
All right. So now what this also sets into precedence is that the government basically say, well, you now need to buy only Fords and not Chevy, and if you don't, we're going to tax you for it.
Essentially, that's it. I mean, to use the reference Justice Ginsburg made during oral argument, now the government could say, well, we need to prop up the broccoli farmers, and because they're going to go under if we don't make everybody buy broccoli. So we're going to make everybody buy broccoli, but call it a tax. to buy broccoli. And besides that, as Mayor Bloomberg says, we've got to stop people from eating all this bad food and make them eat good food for you so we can be healthy. Well, that's none of the government's business to begin with. But the concept is the same. There literally is nothing the government cannot make us do now simply by calling it a tax.
All right. Now, if we have a change in administration, let's say Romney gets elected, and of course he's now vowing he'll repeal Obamacare. I guess that's loaded with a bunch of questions. Can one man repeal it, or can this, through a process, can this bill repealed, and therefore we set things back to hopefully to neutral again?
Well, Congressman Eric Cantor, and I forget what position he has in the House, but he set a vote on repealing Obamacare in the House for, I believe, July 11th. Senate won't even take it up. Now, because this has been declared a tax, there's some slightly different rules on how it can be passed, et cetera. And my understanding, and I haven't done the research on this, but I've been informed that now all they need is 51 votes. They don't need a 60-vote a filibuster-proof margin to repeal this because it's been declared a tax. And if that's true, there's probably enough Senate Democrats up for election this year. There's 23 of them up for election. There's probably enough U.S. Senate Democrats that are concerned enough about the reelection possibilities. I mean, you've seen the ones that are now refusing to go. The senator from the Democratic senator from Missouri, the Democratic senator from West Virginia, the governor of West Virginia, the Democratic congressman of West Virginia, and there'll probably be more, are all refusing to go to the Democratic National Convention because they don't want to be associated with Mr. Obama. So you may see enough Democrats being willing to peel off to vote to overturn Obamacare in the Senate. But the problem is I don't see Harry Reid, who's a master of the rules of the Senate, giving him a chance to do it. What former Governor Mitt Romney is saying is that he'll do what Mr. Obama has already done to a substantial extent. Mr. Obama has been granting waivers to large labor unions that support his reelection, to large companies where the CEOs are supporting his reelection, to hundreds of businesses in Nancy Pelosi's congressional district, giving them waivers from Obamacare. Mr. Romney has said that he's going to give a waiver to all 50 states from Obamacare, which will render it meaningless, in effect, by executive order once he's elected, if he's elected. Now, I have some problems with this whole issue of using executive order to do these things, but that's what Mr. Romney says that he's going to do, so we'll see. Mr. Romney, as we all know, unfortunately, is a big government Republican. It's his Romneycare, which has been a disaster for the state of Massachusetts, by the way. It's his Romneycare that Obamacare is based upon. So I'm not sure how much he's going to be willing to basically destroy something based upon something that he did.
So this law now does set a precedence on taxation and things, and I guess we'll just have to live out and see how this may creep up in the future. But nonetheless, it's there.
Yes, and like I said, this is going to have such wide ramifications. I mean, we're talking about destroying the concept of federalism, the concept of limited and enumerated powers. There's really nothing now the federal government can't control. Historically, the regulation of insurance companies, no matter what type, automobile, health, fire, whatever, has been a state matter. Obviously, Obamacare did away with that. Now, with the ruling that it's constitutional, what are we going to see next? Are we going to see the federal government coming in and deciding divorce law? You know, when divorces can be granted, when they can't, under what terms? I mean, the possibilities are endless and exceedingly scary.
Are we in a judicial crisis? I mean, we got the Attorney General being held of criminal contempt of Congress, and I guess they could go as far as having him arrested. We have this decision coming out from the Supreme Court. Can the Supreme Court be censured in any way?
Well, you can impeach Supreme Court justices. I'm not sure. That's not going to get very far, though.
Right.
I mean, if anybody deserved to be impeached on the Supreme Court right now, it would be Justice Kagan, who, as a matter of law, could not and should not have participated in the Obamacare decision. But she, you know, in her typical way, typical arrogant way, basically said, hey, I'm going to do what I want, nothing you can do about it. And then Justice Roberts would not do anything about it. He would not remove her or take any action to remove her. And so now we have Obamacare. If she hadn't been on hearing this case, and she shouldn't have been, as I said, it would have been a 4-4 break as presently constituted, and the invalidating of the individual mandate from the 11th Circuit would have stood.
Wow. All right, so let's go over to what's happening to Chief Justice, Attorney General Eric Holder. What happens now? I mean, it goes to his department to be to be enforced. That probably is not going to see the light of day.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
Mr. Holder has surrounded himself with a lot of yes men who are not going to do anything other than what he or Barack Obama want. What the Congress did do later that day, the House did do, excuse me, later that day, which has received almost no attention, is that they also voted to authorize a lawsuit against the Department of Justice to force them to turn over the subpoena documents. And that's going to get real interesting because this bogus claim of executive privilege by Mr. Obama really has no legal effect unless the courts allow it to. Because for a claim of executive privilege to be meaningful, it has to be involving something that the president has been involved with. In other words, communications between the president and somebody. Well, if that's the case, and that means that President Obama, I strike that. If that's the case, it means that Barack Obama has admitted that he was involved in Fast and Furious, which could lead to his impeachment. I mean, this is a big cover-up. This is a terrible thing that happened. There are 2 people have died as a result. Now, the Obama administration, oh, well, a few guns went across the border. No, thousands of automatic weapons went across the border. I mean, we're like arming a private army down there for the drug lords. And according to Mr. Obama, it's no big deal. Well, it is to the families of those who have died and who will die as a result of this. But I think it was...
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Can we run the risk of another court maybe asking a court to demand those papers to be turned over when the court system seems to be upside down right now?
Well, right now, the only thing that's upside down appears to be Justice Roberts. There's still a lot of good jurists out there, and I'm hoping that the good jurists out there will see the light of reason and will follow the Constitution. See, in one sense, Obamacare is not necessarily the end. And the reason why is now come all the implementing regulations and the implementing legislation. My foundation is getting involved in several of these lawsuits challenging the mandating of abortion coverage for Catholic and Christian churches and facilities and organizations and private businesses. That's going to be an interesting fight, because that's really a different issue. Yeah. That's mandating action in a different way. There's also going to be the fights over numerous types of the other implementing regulations and legislation. And those will wind up going, I believe, to the United States Supreme Court. And we may actually see a different result.
Well, you know, it being deemed a tax now, tax is kind of like the new 3-letter, 4-letter word, and that probably will play well into the Republicans going into this election cycle.
Well, I've been saying for some time that I thought that due to the incompetence of the Republicans and their candidate, that Mitt Romney was a sure loser and Barack Obama was going to win election. I'm starting to have some doubts about that. We'll have to wait and see. But if the Tea Parties rise up in anger like they did in 2010, this could be a slaughter. I mean, the Democrats, who are all supporting Obamacare, they could wind up going down the toilet big time. We could see more votes added in the House, and we could see the Republicans taking over the Senate and the Republicans taking the White House. I didn't think it was possible even as late as last week. But with this debacle by the Supreme Court and this bizarre ruling, if the Tea Party activists rise up in anger, as they appear to be doing, I think we're going to see some real changes in electoral strategy and what happens in the November elections.
Well, Gary, I know you fought hard on this, and I commend you and your team with what you're doing. You got to really feel somewhat like the rug's been pulled out from underneath you with Chief Justice Roberts, because now can you trust him or the court in future cases?
Well, there's still there's still 3 good conservatives on it, which is Justices Alito, Thomas, and Scalia. And Justice Kennedy has been voting consistently with the conservative wing. The problem is we've had now 2 decisions in a row, the Arizona decision and this decision, which Justice Robert has really gone off the farm and sided with the liberals. And I'm not sure what's going on. I don't know if he's had just a change of heart. Apparently, radio commentators said that maybe he's on medication and that's caused this. And I don't subscribe to that. I think that's ridiculous. And I mean, unless proof comes to show that, I think that's ridiculous. I don't think he's a mole. I don't think, I don't think he's been bribed. All those types of things that are going to come out now about this. I don't think any of them are true. But obviously something happened.
Well, do you think
we don't know what it is.
Do you think the liberals did play a heavy role in trying to say your legacy is at stake here? Do you think that intimidation got to him?
That's my working hypothesis at this point in time. I think that he wanted to avoid the furor against the Supreme Court that resulted from the 2000 election. I think he was afraid it would further damage the credibility of the Supreme Court in the public's eye, and that he was, I believe this was an agenda-driven decision. He was looking for a way to uphold it. He couldn't do it under the Commerce Clause. So he has now done it on this bizarre tax theory, which was repudiated by the Obama White House until after it worked.
Wow.
So we'll see what happens.
Gary, thank you. I know you're tight scheduled, and thank you so much. We value the time together. Hang in there, friend. Keep up the fight, and our prayers are with you and your organization.
Thank you very much, and God bless.